Okay, welcome back to MindSpa Podcast. This is the next installment of our series on neurofeedback. So today, I'm very excited. Yvonne and I, our Director of Neurofeedback, are going to be talking about a very specific type of neurofeedback that we do here called High Performance Neurofeedback. We call it HPN for short. And we've got some stuff here in front of us. So I'm going to let you start though with what is HPN?
Yeah, so HPN we sort of classify like as a general type of neurofeedback, but it can also be thought of as like neuromodulation. So it's very different than some of our more traditional forms of neurofeedback.
Okay.
With HPN, we're actually sending very small frequencies to the brain.
Okay.
Sort of, you can think of it as nudging the brain out of a stuck pattern.
Okay.
So if anyone listened to some of the other podcasts or when we talked about different brain waves, we were talking about how sometimes our brain can get stuck in producing too much or too little of the different waves. So if there's too much high beta or not enough theta or not enough alpha, HPN is a type of treatment that can actually kind of act as like a reset.
Okay.
In a way. I often pair it with some of our traditional types of neurofeedback in a way of let's kind of prime the brain with the HPN and then let's do the learning bit on top of it.
Okay.
So with HPN, there's 5 electrodes.
Yeah. Here, let's
pull it up.
Actually. So these are the 5 electrodes, different colored cords here.
Yes, and that's important. They need to be different colors because the different electrodes are going on very specific areas of the brain. So one of the electrodes goes on, we put it on the back of the neck. That's just the ground. So again, working with electricity, we need to have a ground involved. So that goes on the back of the neck. Then there's 2 electrodes that are references. So they're going behind either ear, so on like the mastoid area, just behind. So those 3 are not moving.
We put a little tape on them, in fact.
Yeah, we use some medical tape here just to keep it in place so it's not moving. And then the last 2 electrodes are what we call our signal electrodes, and those are the electrodes that are actually doing the sending of signals, if you will. So how it works is HPN is a little bit more generalized than our traditional neurofeedback. We can still choose placement of where we want to put the electrodes based off of the QEEG, but there is a general progression that we can follow. So generally, for everybody, we'll start off low. So part of the intake process that I do in asking questions, I'm trying to figure out, okay, where would I want to start them off with HPN? So HPN involves different levels within it. And it's not that one level is better than the other, they just are doing different things. Mm-hmm. So let's say someone who's experienced severe concussions, I'm probably going to start them at level 1 because it produces the least amount of signals versus someone who maybe has no concussion history, doesn't experience many sensory sensitivities, or doesn't find themselves as like very or overly sensitive to medications and having a lot of side effects. I might start them at the level 2.
Right, so level 1 is really reserved for very sensitive people or sensitive brains. Exactly. And very often after a concussion, the brain is very, very sensitive. So we usually we start very gently.
Yeah, because their brain can often respond. There's more risk of responding in a more negative way of noticing potential headache or sleepiness, possible dizziness. I've never really had that report, but more so with like headache and fatigue.
And irritability?
Yeah, irritability can be one.
Be a side effect too. We call it Overstim in the industry. I can tell a little story of my own Overstim. So I was training somebody once with neuro, and I had noticed I'd never been overstimulated before. I had done quite a few sites before, and so I had encouraged them just to do all of the sites, which I think ended up being 12. I had them do 12 different sites on the brain because I wanted them to practice every spot. And at first I felt fine and I felt normal, but the next day I was so tired that I am driving, and I got a great night's sleep because that's one of the things that HPN can really help with is like deeper, better sleep, particularly at the beginning. And I got a great night's sleep, and I'm driving to work and I am falling asleep at 9 a.m. trying to drive to work that I literally had to physically hold my eye because they kept wanting to close.
Yeah.
And then later that day, I was seeing clients, and then I had a break in my day, and I was actually working in an office without a couch. I just had an office chair and a comfy chair, but nothing else. And I was so exhausted. I needed to take a nap. I slept on the floor
of
my office and fell asleep so deeply. I had to set an alarm. Luckily, I set an alarm. I fell asleep so deeply that I had the creases all over my face when I woke up.
Yeah.
And then had an incredible sleep that night, and then the next day I was still tired.
Wow.
That's how much I overstimulated my brain. But that's sort of, and why you don't call it necessarily a bad reaction is that with this treatment, while we don't want to do that, we don't want to cause people to have that level of exhaustion, we don't want to make people irritable, we don't want them to get headaches.
Yeah.
But from a treatment standpoint, that's not a bad thing for their brain. We haven't done anything negative to the brain. If anything, we've pushed it out of its comfort zone, and we know it worked. We know that it effectively did tell the brain to stop doing what it was doing.
And that's a good example of why we start people off lower. So even if there's no sensitivities or history of concussion, even at level 2, I start people off level 2, maybe 2 sites.
Yeah.
When I say 2 sites, so again, the 2 electrodes that we're putting on, that would be considered 1 site, because whatever we do to the left hemisphere, we're doing to the right. So both electrodes is considered 1 site.
Okay.
So if we were to do 2 sites, it would be the 1 and then moving 1 to one other spot.
Okay.
And that would be 2. So we always start off low to minimize the chances of encountering overstim.
Yeah.
But just like you said, for me, I always frame it, if we do encounter overstim, I'm like, you know what, this is information.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a negative, like, of course it's uncomfortable, and it's not a fun experience.
It's not a goal.
Yeah, it's not like our goal, but it gives us information, and it tells us that you are responsive to this type of treatment.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Yes.
So now we just need to fiddle around
and figure out
with
how many sites
we need to do. And let's say, for example, we did level 2 sites, and they experienced some level of overstim. Okay, we're gonna go to level 1, but maybe we don't need to go to that 2 sites. Maybe we can do level 1, but do 4 sites.
Right.
Right? Because it's different.
It's actually good to find our top end of the treatment, because some people, it takes a high level and a lot of sites to respond. So we actually save time if we do overstim, but we always explain that to people. We allow them to choose. We're usually like, what do you got going on this next week? Can you handle being a bit more tired, maybe a bit irritable? And if they're like, no, we go, okay, we'll start very slow, very gentle.
Yeah. Yeah, and generally for a lot of people, because there is this stimulation, I kind of explain the benefits and risks of doing the HPN. A lot of people are like, let's just start low and we'll do the trial and error. Usually what it ends up being is like, okay, let's say we do a session of HPN. And this is a cool type of neurofeedback because you might possibly notice positive results after the first session.
Yes,
when and traditional neuro isn't like that.
Yes.
So it's like we do one session and you're like, some people have come back and they're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow, this is incredible. So that's a possibility, and that doesn't happen with everyone. Some people is like, okay, we need to do a bit more of that trial and error.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, let's say there is someone who comes in, they didn't notice anything after our first session. That means the next time we're gonna add on sites. So that means we're moving the electrodes to more spots.
Yeah.
So those 2 spots, let's say we were gonna do 5 sites. We're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
Right? And again, there's a certain progression that we can do that works from the front of the head to the back, and then across the sides, down the middle, back to the front again.
Right. Because we want to hit all the different lobes of the brain, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, it kind of goes from front to back and then back to front. But we can also adjust too, from my experience too, with specific symptoms or different levels of fatigue and stuff, or just for example, I find people with depression work really well with level 3.
Yeah.
That's been an experience of mine. It's very calming, very regulating. Sometimes I'll be like, hey, we can try this. Yeah. And it's a similar option. We can try this. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe it does.
I found the longer that I worked with this machine, because I think I've been interacting with this machine for maybe 8 years now, is that there's almost an intuition that starts developing as a practitioner of you've tried different things with different people, it's worked really well, you have a client in front of you describing a very similar situation, and you go, you know what, let's try this. Because I even remember I had a client with insomnia, and I just happened to notice because when this is set up to our computer, we can actually look in real time again and see what brainwave activity somebody's having. I saw two very interesting things. One was when she closed her eyes, all of a sudden the activity was very different with her eyes closed. So I said, let's train actually with this, with your eyes closed instead of your eyes open. And there was another one where whenever he was hooked up, it looked like interference, like his brain would go basically out of sorts. It would really, all the brain waves would start overproducing. I had to step out of the room for a moment and go grab something. And so I left the room and I came back in. When I first opened the door, I saw that his brainwave activity was normal. And then he realized I was there and it went crazy again. And I realized there was a lot of social anxiety there, and how much calmer he was when I wasn't in the room versus when I was in the room.
Yeah.
So again, it was like, okay, this I'm seeing in real time, this reaction to me, and it's better to actually train it and do this particular neurofeedback while he was dysregulated, because that's actually what we want to
that's the pattern we want to interrupt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think of this too as more of a treatment instead of a training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're applying something.
Yeah. Whereas the other electrodes are just picking up the brainwave activity and showing it to us on our screen. This is both picking up brainwave activity and then also introducing new electrical current into the brain. Again, you can't feel a thing.
Yes, you don't feel it at all.
There's no sensation.
Yeah. Yeah, the frequencies it's sending are the frequencies that your brain is producing already. So it's like the alpha, the beta.
Right. It's just mirroring back slightly different versions of what it's already doing to interrupt the pattern and improve neuroplasticity.
Yeah. And with that said too, it sends the signals based off of the dominant frequency that's being picked up where the electrodes are placed.
Right. Which often the dominant frequency is the problematic one.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when it comes to why would we recommend this one to people?
That's a good question. I find for some people, and with my experience with HPN, has been that people have described it as like clearing out the cobwebs again. So I find like it offers that opportunity to reset and prime the brain, give it more capacity and space to be able to do some of the learning.
Okay.
Right? So it interrupts that stuck pattern, and then when we do the learning on top of it, the two paired together can work really well.
Yeah.
So the brain, it's almost like we're kind of giving the brain a leg up to do the learning portion.
One of the ways that I've thought about this one as well is that I love HPN for things where your brain was healthy, it was good, it was not having any symptoms of anything, and then something happened. A trauma happened, a head injury happened, or like a stressful period, like a lengthy stressful period. So anybody after COVID could have benefited from HPN. So something happened to dysregulate them. And this kind of puts us back to factory settings. Whereas I think of traditional neurofeedback, its strength is being able to go, your brain has never done this thing before that we want it to do. So let's go with ADHD. Your brain has always been maybe overproducing a certain brainwave. We'll get into the details of that later, but with ADHD, you're born with that, right? Your brain is born that way, and we can change that. It's never done before, whereas high performance neurofeedback isn't one that's going to teach your brain to do something it doesn't know how to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I agree. And I do find that with HPN, it's very helpful with, anxiety, depression, sleep. I'd say those are some like the big ones. HPN's not necessarily something that I would do with, it is very helpful with ADHD and can help facilitate the learning process, but as like a standalone, where I would recommend HPN alone would be situations with like anxiety, depression, trauma.
Yeah. And concussion, right?
Yeah, it can be very helpful. I think with concussion, you need to be a little bit more careful or really
the ability
paying attention.
To overstim is very easy.
Because overstim is a lot easier with concussion because the brain is in a more fragile state
could
from that.
exacerbate more of those post-concussive symptoms.
But on the flip side of that, the positive effects that it can have are so substantial that most people are like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. I have found the most noticeable improvements being anybody who's ever had a concussion. What's so interesting about this too is a lot of people, myself included actually, if I'd ever had a concussion, I said no. But then I had this memory of this time that I stood up when I was getting in one of those open Jeep vehicles that had a bar, and I stood up and hit the very top of my head. Now, do I remember having any concussion symptoms like nausea or fatigue or anything like that afterwards? No, but I can't say that that didn't impact my brain anyway, right? And so I think that sometimes you wouldn't know what impact that had, but HPN could show you a little bit.
Yeah.
Because that could resolve those symptoms that came from a significant hit to the head that also might not have reached concussion level.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where, like, sometimes I do find, like, for, you know, depending on the severity of the post-concussive symptoms, sometimes they'll say, okay, let's do a couple of stabilizing single channel, which is another type of neurofeedback that we'll kind of explore in another episode, but that can be stabilizing. Do a few of those and then introduce the HPN.
Okay.
Just to give the brain a little bit more stability before adding that piece in can be helpful. And that's all dependent, like this, so much of it is very individualized based on what the symptoms the individual is experiencing and, you know, how recent was the head injury and level of functioning, all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it adds a layer of complexity when creating the treatment plans for people. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this, is helping people understand what all these things are, because we, from working with people over the years, can sort of get a sense of, you know, they're a very good candidate for maybe trying a bit of high performance neurofeedback, see how much progress we can make with that, and then whatever doesn't resolve with that, then we can target very specifically with our other forms.
Yeah, I find that too, like some people, they maybe can't, traditional neurofeedback really relies on that consistency and repetition, or maybe they're in a place where they don't have the ability to engage in like watching something. And that's where I'm like, okay, let's start some HPN. Like I'll go the opposite way of, let's do some HPN, see, you know, does it regulate? Do you notice any positive changes with it? And then maybe we can introduce the single channel or Loretta, whatever traditional neurofeedback we want to do at a later date.
Yeah. And what I like about this, actually, that you bring it up, is that this is done weekly. It's never done twice a week. It can even be done, for us, very much what we usually notice is when we've done a treatment at the very beginning, most people will notice between 24 and 48 hours, there'll be a noticeable difference, which will slowly wear off. Then we do another treatment, and ideally we're looking for the results to start lasting longer and longer. And then if we have people coming in saying, I still feel good, that's when we might say, let's try every 2 weeks, or let's try 10 days. Let's see how long it's lasting for. Because ultimately, this isn't meant to be done forever. Lots of people will say, I'm feeling a lot better. I've seen incredible results with panic attacks, where this person was having panic attacks maybe a couple times a week. It's been 6 weeks since their last panic attack. And then I have a lot of people that just kind of come in as needed, or they might come in for a little tweak twice a year. They're like, oh, something happened and I'm feeling a little off. So they come, get a little boost. Right?
Honestly, I'll use HPN sometimes, but in that context of like, I'll kind of use it when I'm feeling the stress more. When I'm like, oh, you know, I could use a little HPN booster. And it does make a difference. And sometimes it's usually like sleep related too, of like, you know, I know that I'm going to sleep well when I do the HPN.
And it can get sleep back on track.
So I'm like, I'm going to do an HPN because I feel like I haven't slept well. I'm kind of tired. And that often does the trick. And the other thing too is this can be very helpful combined with therapy. And even for some therapy, like, I mean, in the MindSpa context, there's possibilities of incorporating, you know, if your clinician does that, into sessions, right? I have some clients where I'll do HPN and then we'll do therapy right after. Because often some people notice the effects pretty quickly and will be like, it gives me more space to, then we can explore more trauma or, you know, go into those thoughts a little bit more. There's more capacity to organize
their thoughts.
And
again, from that nervous system, this helps regulate and calm the nervous system. And so, we function a lot better with a calm nervous system than a not calm nervous system. I also incorporate HPN with a lot of my clients as well. And I love, because while we're doing this, I can do a check-in. How was your week? Just give me the top level sort of synopsis of how like things have been going. Exactly. I'm like, I almost feel like a hairdresser when I, you know, once this is done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the other thing about this to know is, what is the role of doing a QEEG brain map and doing HPN only? Is there a version that people can get HPN without doing the QEEG brain map?
Yeah, so it is possible, like HPN, because there is a more general progression that we can go off of.
Or like a standardized protocol that we can do for everybody.
There is more space to do it without a QEEG. I always say, I'm like, you know what? Best practice is to always do a Q, because it gives us a lot of insight as to how your brain is functioning. And then, let's say there is a lot of too much or too little of different brainwaves in the frontal lobes specifically. Okay, maybe that might mean that I would place the electrodes more focused towards the frontal lobe.
Right, so you change your treatment plan.
Yeah, sometimes it will follow the same typical progression, but you don't have to do the QE. Like, you could just do the HPN.
Right.
That's just where
because it's working with your brain already, and we're not trying to make it do something it doesn't know how to do. We don't necessarily need to be looking at it.
Yeah, and that's where, if you're working with your client, what their symptom presentation is. Like, you've got that, like, you've done the intake and all the things, which is why it doesn't need to have the QEEG done. But I think just because of a lot of the work I do where I combine it with traditional neurofeedback or different things, I often do the QEEG with it, but it doesn't mean that it has to be done. The Q can give you good insight, but it's not necessary.
They fit a good profile for working with HPN, so that would be if they have anxiety, if they have a history of concussion, mood, depression as well, or symptoms of depression, and budget is a concern, then we might be able to give them this as an option, right?
Yeah.
Because this would be just one session a week, not necessarily need the QEEG. I think we do reserve for, if there is a history of concussion, then we insist on a QEEG, because we do not want to we want to be able to see what's going on before. But if there's zero history of concussion.
If there's no history of, like, if we were to do the intake, like, there's no history of, like, concussion, seizures of any kind, hallucination, psychosis, like those types of things. Headaches, migraines too, depending on, like, the nature of them.
Because we don't want to exacerbate those. We don't want to make those worse.
Yeah.
The last thing you want is somebody coming in for migraines and we give them migraines.
Yeah. And that's where, like, the intake is so important, right? Because they can usually give you the context of, like, okay, how frequently are they? What's the intensity? Are they in association with something? Like, how are they triggered? Like, where or why are they coming up? That can allow us, because if it's, a headache here and there, but they're not tied to anything, okay, we probably don't need to, like, we could just do the HPN. We don't need to do the QEEG.
But when I think of high performance neurofeedback too, I would say this is our neurofeedback that we're going to introduce if someone wants peak performance, right? Because this isn't something that only if you have symptoms of something this can help you. You don't need to have insomnia to find it helps you sleep more deeply and have more restorative sleep, or you don't have to have clinical anxiety for it to help just regulate your nervous system and build even more resilience than you already have, right?
Yeah. It can be helpful just to boost your everyday.
Focus. A lot of people, what I find is they'll say they feel more like themselves.
I actually had someone who said they were better at the sport that they played.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Because it just helps the brain function at a higher level. The communication in the brain improves. So
there's more clarity, right?
I do have to say, like, we all really love this machine. I remember my friend, she was like, you're the best salesperson in the world when it comes to HPN, because I've used it for so long. I've used it with so many different people. And it's actually really hard in this line of work, because a lot of people come to stuff like this very skeptical, and you're like, I understand the skepticism. And honestly, if somebody was telling me what I know about this machine, I'd be like, sounds too good to be true. Or why don't more people know about this? Or why don't doctors recommend it? I'm like, I 100% understand that. But being in it as long as we have and seeing the results that we have with this,
it's incredible.
The idea of not being able to have it for clients or be able to use it for all of us is like,
I've seen it really helpful with autism as well.
Okay, right. Because do you want to explain a little bit the sensory, because it's the sensory piece, right?
Yeah. So actually, one of my experience was a child who was, like, nonverbal, who started to speak more in sentences and, like, using some words. And I just remember, like, the parents' reaction. They were just like, oh my gosh. And then one similar but improving, like, their behavioral regulation and their reaction to sensory input. So with that, it had a lot to do with I usually in those cases I'll start at like the central strip, which for people listening, it's right along in alignment with the ears, right up to the top, over the middle part of your head.
Yeah.
Because that part of the brain has a lot to do with sensory and motor input and output.
Yeah.
So with autism specifically, there are patterns that we can see in the brain that associate with autism in that part of the brain. So I'll often put the electrodes in that spot, and we're kind of like interrupting that pattern, right?
Yeah.
So I've seen improvement with behaviors and also how they're responding to sensory information.
Yeah.
More capacity, and then with like the verbal aspects.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is from what we understand, very often the behaviors are potentially stemming from an overstimulation of the sensory experience. So it's often going to get triggered by sights, sounds, smells, all that type of stuff. So if the sensory part of the brain is calmer, it takes more to actually cause emotional overwhelm, which then often is the thing that leads to the behavioral side to it.
Yeah. So it offers, more capacity for them to manage those experiences, which is pretty incredible to see. And even I think technicians can speak to it too, in terms of what they see in sessions of like, wow, like where we started in session versus like where we are now in terms of like their behaviors or their reactions in session.
Right.
They're like, oh my gosh, it's incredible. The
ability
difference.
to sit still, ability to communicate with the technician, I imagine, all that kind of stuff. So we're a big fan of this machine.
Love HPN.
But if people want to know more, that's another way that if anybody is listening to this and they want to just find out more about their specific situation in HPN, we do those 20-minute free consults where they can speak to you or one of the technicians and find out more about specifically what this is, how this can help them. And whether, because there's very few things, like you said, that we want to be more careful on. While interestingly, as far as I understand, this machine was actually developed to help with seizures, but because seizures is a medical issue and we cannot treat medical issues, it wouldn't be considered a treatment for seizures, but we just want to be really, really careful because we never want to trigger any seizure activity.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, that's all I can think of to tell you about HPN right now, but that is the end of HPN. All things HPN. That's it for today's episode of the MindSpa Podcast. If this conversation resonated, I'd love it if you would follow and share. It's a small thing that makes a big difference. The links to our podcast platforms, Instagram and YouTube, are in the show notes, and your support helps us reach more people and attract the voices you want to hear.